Well, welcome back from lunch. It was not fun. We're joined today by an illustrious panel. We're very excited to get after it. I was told to keep the introductions short, so I did a quick haiku for everybody. So indulge me with that for a second. First of all, Meredith Halama is a partner at Perkins Coie. She co-chairs the firm's privacy and data management practice. But you really need to know, privacy expert. Hello, job security. From fake Washington. So thanks for flying out from DC. We have Dr. Stefan Wachenfeld, the Chief Product Officer at WeQ, where he applies machine learning to real mobile advertising decisions. What you really need to know, 4 tech co's founded, PhD machine learning, don't we feel easy? So thanks for making us look dumb and not getting stuff done. Finally, last but not least, Carrie DeJulio, Senior Vice President of Product and Marketing at Big Fish Games, a Seattle brand that many of us know and love just down the street. Carrie, Big Fish Games legend, launched career at Real Networks, UW grad, go Dogs. So thank you guys for joining us. We're here to talk about GDPR, but more generally about data privacy in digital marketing. What's happened? A lot recently. What's next? Can't wait to find out. And what should companies do about it? But this is Postback, all right? This is not a conference for lawyers and regulators. Meredith, we're outnumbered. But I want to start with a question for Stefan. Are we about to waste our audience's time for the next 26 minutes? Why is this important?
I think we will see. We will see if we need more coffee for everyone or if we can actually say something. But I think it's an important topic on multiple levels. Like, I think everybody here had to get ready for it in its own company, both handling customer data but also employee data. And then I don't know who's into product, but everybody who is needs to actually deal with it on a technical level and do the implementation of actually some technical methods that are compliant. And so I think that plus a strategic level, like looking at all the partners that we have, like how are they doing? Are they compliant? And I think so. I think there's different angles to look at it, and I hope it's going to be 25 minutes that pay off.
And so, Carrie, Big Fish Games, I imagine, put a lot of effort into gearing up for this. A lot of companies put a lot of time and a lot of money into that. Was that necessary?
Well, I think I kind of translate it to a lot of different phases the industry's gone through in reacting to different regulations. So I was working in the operations group at Real Networks in the early 2000s when Sarbanes-Oxley came on the scene, and everyone was determining how to react to that. And there was this fear that it was going to drag down business, that it was going to be too costly, that it was going to be disruptive. But over time, the business and the industry adapted to it, and I think that was really important for setting the stage for e-commerce to become kind of the global powerhouse that it is today. And so I look at GDPR in sort of a similar lens, that we will over time learn more about the regulations. So regulations get defined over time through the courts. So we're still kind of in the beginning phase of really learning what this is going to look like, but we will react to it and formulate processes, and this will become kind of an ongoing part of how we do business. I think the one difference between GDPR and SOX is that SOX, for those of you who don't know, SOX is all about how you track revenue that you process internally and make sure that all that data is correct, and so you can report out in public markets correct financials and all that kind of good stuff. But SOX is very internally focused on the organization, right? So you sort of have SOX compliance within your world, and for the most part, it is sort of within the world. I think GDPR affects a very complex industry at a lot of different layers. So it's not just the way that you deal with data, but it's the relationships that you have and data that's shared. It's impacting, developers, advertisers, ad networks, different partners, platforms, and so we have to sort of figure out a solution together in a more complex industry.
So it wasn't time wasted leading up to May 25th, project's done, we can move on to the next thing. We don't owe our CFOs an apology for the investment in time. at WeQ, was there a big push leading up to GDPR on May 25th, or part of the culture?
Yeah, it's not even over yet. I think
Yeah.
most companies, and including us, are still also dealing on the employee side with that, and making the employees sign all the data processing agreements and those kind of things. I think on a strategic level, it's up in the stars, like how. I mean, one thing is the penalties that some companies might get, so which makes them move, but the other thing is what is the customer expectation? So do I have as a company to really look at my partners? And I think that is going to show in the next 6 months probably how hot the soup is that we cooked.
Do you want to talk about the differences being a European company to kind of GDPR versus what some of us as a US company might have had to deal with? I think that's an interesting point for everyone to kind of understand.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know how it is, of course, to be an American company, but I imagine that maybe.
Stefan's from Germany, if you couldn't tell.
If you cannot tell by my accent, haha. Yeah. Yeah. So, no, but. Yeah, I heard a lot of times that from maybe overseas it's like, okay, the crazy Europeans or something like that. And so for us it maybe is a little bit more natural and we're a little bit more closer to it. But I think it's a general thing that was also mentioned earlier in the keynote, that privacy, or Andrew also said it, that already 3 years ago he sat on a privacy panel. So we were discussing these topics for a long time. And yeah, I think there's first this expectation that an industry might self-regulate, and then if that doesn't happen, someone steps in. And of course, on topics like privacy, Europe is a little bit more quick in doing that than maybe a liberal America. So for us, it felt normal. But I also remember, like my parents in the 80s, when there was the census, there was a huge cry out, and people were going on the streets because they were asked to put their religion or gender or something on the census questions. And oh my God, we're all becoming this transparent, see-through citizen, and we don't want to be that. And today everybody puts all this data somewhere, and I think we became, or like society became aware of that, and now we're reacting. So that is the perception as a German company. Yes, it is normal. Yes, it is expected. And in other areas, it's the same. Like if you look at crypto now, which is as new as advertising was maybe 10 years ago, or mobile advertising at least, there's the same wild, wild west going on. And of course, regulation harms businesses that can do freely what they want. But in order to trust that system, also there will be a regulation. So I think it's a very normal thing in every industry. Same with finance or insurance or health. Like first there's a Wild West and then regulation kicks in. So we as Europeans, I would say, see it as a necessary thing, and it was about time that there's a law. How good that is and how well it's going to be enforced is a different question.
To build upon what you're saying too, I mean, I think that the way I look at it, the rate of sharing information and users' comfort level with sharing information has outpaced their understanding of how that information might be used. And I think that's true on a consumer level. I think that's also true within a company, that it's been easier to store, and storage gets cheap over time. And so it's easier just to store this data and not think about how it might be used or how it might be costly in the future. It feels really cheap right now, but it might be costly in the future if you have a breach, or if you're found in sort of compliance issues with some of these new regulations that are coming out. And so it's really, I think GDPR and a lot of the other stuff that we're seeing happening in California, Colorado, Brazil, is a negotiation and trying to build an understanding between the industry and the consumer about how data will be used, and a little bit more transparency there.
Okay. Can I ask you back, are you expecting, or like, would you wish for the same thing to be? I think even in the translation of GDPR, I think instead of general, some people
global.
Global, yeah. So would you wish for that to be your law also?
Well, I think that we're seeing it pop up in different places. And Meredith, maybe you could speak to that a little bit too, and kind of the trends around the world.
Yeah, I think that California has a law that some are dubbing like a mini GDPR, GDPR-like law. I think it has some material differences. My perspective is that I don't necessarily think most Americans would necessarily, they might think that they want something like a GDPR, but then they might find the friction of it a little bit much. Certainly businesses, I think, aspire to provide GDPR-like protections globally, but some of the nuances and the detailed obligations are things that US business are not quite ready to implement globally.
Meredith, why don't we set the table a little bit for the non-lawyer audience? What is GDPR and what is it not?
Yeah, so GDPR is Europe's brand new data protection regulation. You wouldn't know it from the press, but the EU has actually had pretty robust data protection laws for a long time. What's really new for purposes of this audience are, one, that it's now backed by really robust enforcement, so everyone hears the 4% of global revenues, and also this very clear expansion of the definition of personal data. So now includes IP addresses, cookie IDs, mobile device identifiers, and those are all things, most of my clients are ad tech providers, and for a long time we could sort of say, well, that's not really personal data, or maybe it is, but we don't really have to do these things. And now those things are all very clearly regulated, meaning that they need to provide transparency, offer choice, secure data, and everything else that this very long law requires.
And you were previously at the NAI, which I'm going to butcher it, but I think it stands. Tell us what it stands for.
Network Advertising Initiative.
Play it safe. Yeah, thank you. And that was a self-regulating body. How's that self-regulating body doing nowadays?
Ooh. They are continuing to offer consumers choice, cookie-based choice. In the US, I think it's fair to say that EU regulators are not huge fans of cookie-based opt-outs. They think something more is required, and so I think it remains to be seen exactly how those opt-out solutions will play out in the EU. There are initiatives from the IAB EU and others to, I think of it as almost flip that opt-out on its head and make it an opt-in, and you can opt out if you would like. But I think a lot of people hope that it would be settled and we would know the future of the NAI and others by May 25th. But instead, we're still very much in flux and seeing what people really care about.
Let me toss this out as a follow-on to that is, I don't think a lot of us expect regulators to come kicking down our doors tomorrow and say, you are not GDPR compliant, give us all of your data, we're going to prove it. I actually believe that there is a self-regulating force that's been prompted by GDPR, where our market partners, our vendors, our clients, that's really pushing the industry forward. So is that a controversial statement, or I'm getting a lot of nods?
Well, I think because there's so much cooperation required to sort of work towards GDPR and all the pieces of that it sort of forced some of this dialogue within the industry, which I think is really healthy. And then I think there's just going to be more kind of more of that sorted out over time, because right now it still is very complex. And I think that over time we're going to figure out ways to make it simple, and as we get sort of more detail about how these things are being interpreted, that'll also help hopefully clarify and simplify some of it.
I think also that you have a regulation and then there's a good chance nobody's doing anything. But there's also a good chance that someone at least is doing something, and then the question for all the others is that someone that actually does something, is he getting a competitive advantage by doing that? Imagine a consent management platform, and imagine your competitors are on it and you're not. So I think that is actually what makes people move. So I don't think it's people fearing to get a penalty or something like that, even though that might happen. But I think it's more, okay, there's a new ecosystem evolving around managing consent, opt-ins, executing a right to be forgotten and all these kind of things. And you want to be part of that, because if that happens without you, you might be off the landscape in short time. And so I think that is the effect, and that keeps people moving.
I think those are all great points, and it brings up another point, which is in the US for a long time, we've talked about self-regulation as effectively referring to self-regulatory bodies like the NAI or the DAA and the code of conduct that's overseen kind of from on high. And I think what we're seeing now is self-regulation, sort of little s, little r, companies looking at each other, demanding certain things of each other. And so you can have your interpretation of the GDPR, but if your partner disagrees with you and won't work with you unless you adopt theirs, well, then that's what you're doing. And so I think exactly that we are all moving to a place where we're sort of self-regulating in a much more informal way than has evolved in the US.
And how does that dialogue happen? You don't want to tip your cards if you're worried maybe you haven't done something just right, so you're afraid to reveal too much. But for this to be successful, you need to trust your partners. You need to have transparency. So are you giving advice to your clients or seeing things that work, or perhaps conversations that Stefan and Carrie, you're having with your vendors and clients as well?
I'll let
start with
Meredith
Carrie
take
and
that one.
Bring it back.
From what I see, I think a lot of it starts often with conversations or contracts. Like I've had several instances where we're working with clients, we kind of come up with a game plan, and then we have a contract dropped on us that actually requires something different. And I think when you see that, you sort of have to decide, is this actually required by the law? If not, as a business matter, do we want to adopt it? And there's often not clear answers, but I think we will gradually evolve to a place where certain standards emerge and sort of the trend is moving one way, and then you move there along with it.
I would add the other piece that we haven't talked about yet is, we all, or at least in a mobile space, all work with some major platforms, and so that the way that they interpret the GDPR is going to influence the way that the industry moves in that interpretation as well. So I think, there's one of the big myths, I would say, of GDPR is that it's just this regulatory, or people are just concerned about the regulatory impact. But I think for everyone that has business in a mobile sense and works with all these platforms, there's also a concern about being in line with what the platforms want and are going to require because of those GDPR regulations, and making sure that that's a business risk that you have to control as well.
Yeah, I remember we have, like you said, we have data protection laws in place since a long time. And I remember on the product side, I had conversations on, okay, how do I exchange 1 million IDFAs without breaking the law? And then you had technologies for that, like Bloom filters and those kind of things, where you not actually transfer the IDFAs and things. But that was always bilateral conversations that you had with one party, and now I think, like you said, there's these big players that start moving. Also, there's dedicated players that specialize in nothing else but providing the platform, and it might be that this regulation creates another the winner takes it all market, where someone later will have the power over global consent of people, and so yeah, you want to be part of that. And so I think where in the past we had bilateral conversations, now it's oftentimes strategic and platform conversations. How can we participate in a platform? How can we make our tracking platform use a standard? How do we standardize, and so on? So I think that is the shift that I see, and that is also the effect here.
That's an interesting twist on it. You're basically talking about a business opportunity, because somebody's going to do it right. People are going to glom on to those efforts.
Yeah.
And so is that something you're seeing as well, or is this just something to avoid staying out of the press? Or do you see this as business opportunities emerging from being a really great actor in the data privacy space?
I think it's a clear yes. I mean, it is actually, even, I would say, there's some actors that benefit from this, and I would even say it's a created regulation also in that sense that, I mean, if I was a big company, let's say, that had first-party data and direct access to customers, well, how about I make a regulation that requires everybody to get consent from the users, and I get it for free next time they log into my social network, for example.
Carrie, how do you view that? Do you view that as something to just check the box, or wow, this is a play that could make us differentiate ourselves?
I mean, I think that there's potential for differentiation at a platform level. I think I'm not sure I see it at sort of a individual business level. I think that there's, as far as offering content, I think there's probably a B2B play there for some sort of universal solutions to help businesses with GDPR. But I also think that there's different ways that people are interpreting it, and you can see that some people, and especially bigger businesses, have decided to go more insular. So if sharing data is a concern, let's not share any of that data. We have such a big network ourselves, we can do more of this internally, which I think is one approach that may benefit them or may hurt them longer term. I also think that for kind of medium or smaller, that's where that cooperation and interdependence is really important. So there's probably business opportunities there, but I think the majority of it's going to be led by the platforms. Because if they come out with it, they're going to squash anyone that's trying to come out with a smaller solution.
Mm-hmm. Meredith, are you hearing from your clients that this is something they're excited about, or
you already have
call
a
the lawyer
business
on May 22nd
in that area.
help us?
No, they may or may not have talked about those crazy Europeans. No, I would say that I would be lying if I said that there was a lot of kind of like embracing this as this awesome opportunity. But I do think that there is quite a bit at this point of acknowledgement of like internally, this is the way we can get budget to have better security, better privacy. And so there is kind of a grudging acceptance of it at this point. And to your question, Ben, I think like in the immediate term, there are clearly people who are using the GDPR as a business play and making a lot of money off of it. I think longer term, in terms of like people who are in this audience, are not necessarily those people that people who take privacy seriously will win out. I think it will take longer, but I think we will start to see the companies that sort of just refuse to invest in it, refuse to take this seriously, maybe not today, but over the long term, they just won't be able to meet their partners' demands. And so ultimately, it will lead to business success, but it will take a while.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a shout out also to all the smart marketing people here, because I think it's the same with animal protection rights or something. Yeah, you have these animal protection rights, and of course everybody agrees, but you still buy whatever the cheapest milk or something, unless a very smart marketing person comes and creates the wish in all the people to buy bio milk and bio yogurt and bio everything. And so that, I mean, because I think in itself, just producing the milk or the meat or whatever in an animal-friendly way doesn't give you the competitive advantage. The competitive advantage comes if you combine it with a marketing and a need and make people, give them a word that they can ask for. I want bio, so I want GDPR compliance. So if they have a word and it becomes a term and it becomes something that they really want, I think then it starts to have a chance to become a sellable good or
so what I'm hearing is GDPR is the soy milk of the marketplace.
Yes, works well with yoga.
I will use the moderator's prerogative there because that was a really great softball and perfect answers. Yeah, we do take this seriously. To let all of you know that Tuna's earned its e-privacy seal for GDPR compliance for both the TMC and has offers, so we do take it seriously. I want to reflect a little bit on May 25th. We're 2 months past, and it kind of felt like Y2K. It was this frenetic buildup. We popped a couple of champagne bottles at 3 p.m. Seattle. It was midnight in Berlin to celebrate. You stopped getting all of those emails in your inbox saying, hey, we got new privacy terms. Please read and click here to consent. That was very fun for lawyers. But what other war stories do you have in that kind of crazy buildup to May 25th and then the kind of hangover the day after? Maybe that was just us.
I mean, I think humor was a really important part of sort of the build-up to it, right? I mean, things were evolving as we headed towards May 25th. Everyone was kind of developing their strategies and, learning more about how your partners' strategies interacted with your strategies. And through that, some of that ambiguity, having a sense of humor really helps with that. So one of my favorite GDPR jokes was, asking someone, hey, do you know a great GDPR consultant? And they go, yeah, I know this great person. Say, hey, can you give me their email address? Nope.
Yeah.
It's a gooder.
All right, so have a sense of humor. I think we talked a little bit in our previous call about...
The funny thing is, the lesson learned is have food before you talk about it. If you're hungry and you then talk about GDPR, you get into fights or it escalates.
That's why we're having this right after lunch. We think these
So
things through.
have a food, be happy, and then it works much better. No, but I think the thing is here, you can go completely paranoid and overdo everything, or you're super relaxed and you don't do anything, and to find something that is really, someone that is alert and then rolls up the sleeves and does it is essential. Probably that's what the observation is. Also, when you look at different companies, probably some are on this end and some on the other, and you try to bring the ones in the middle and the other ones as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I call it pragmatic compliance, especially for smaller to mid-sized companies. You're not probably going to have the Cadillac, but you need to do something. And for me, the lesson learned sort of from my clients is something Carrie has referenced, that compliance in a silo is great. You need to have internal processes and procedures. You need to be able to say that you're compliant. But in this space in particular, so much of your compliance depends upon the compliance of the data coming from here, where the data is going there, who got consent for you to show that ad. And if I could do it all over again, or help my clients do it all over again, we all would have started talking to each other a lot earlier than we did. And so I think the lesson for next time is to start those conversations earlier, and now to keep having them even though May 25th is passed.
That's great. So we've got just 2 minutes left, and I want to go down the row for the takeaway that folks can bring. It's Thursday afternoon now. There's a lot of great content. Folks are going to get back to the office next Monday, and they're going to want to look like they know what they're talking about when it comes to GDPR. But they're also going to want to move the company forward. So what is the thing that they ought to flag for their privacy lead at the company and make sure they're doing? Or maybe it's not happening right now and kick off a new initiative for the second half of the year. What's the key takeaway for ad networks and advertisers and other folks in the room?
I think that I'll let Meredith talk to sort of specifics, but at a very conceptual level, to me, it's really just about understanding your data, thinking about your data, starting with, okay, what data do we collect? What data do we have? Where do we store it? Who do we send it to? What's the business need for why we have it? What's the business need for who we send it to? If we don't have a business need, why are we collecting it in the first place? Just stop it. And then that gives you a really fundamental understanding of your business that I think is useful and can help you see your business in a different way, maybe see opportunities or risks differently. But it also gives you a great starting point to then go talk to your GDPR lawyer of choice and have the conversations about how to move that forward.
I think even though it's maybe boring or it's not the topic where, like, on the boat party you make the most friends with, but I think, if you want to find out where you are on the spectrum, it makes sense to talk about it, just to figure out, are you the paranoid guy or are you too relaxed? And to have a couple of data points and asking other players in the market, how are you doing this? How do you do that? What is your process? What does it look like? And I guess so far, at least in the Berlin ecosystem, people are very willing to share that, or it's ex-employees that are in different companies, and you get this feeling, and then you can triangulate and see, okay, here I am, and I need to do more, or I'm totally overdoing it with my employee thing and have them sign 20 pages of paper. Let's not do that and save efforts on that.
Yeah, and then I would just pick up, get all that information. I completely agree with that. And don't be afraid to pivot. This is a really complex law. Very smart people come to completely different conclusions about what it means. And so even if you've built your compliance that the way you think is right, like I said before, it really depends on what other people are doing and working with them. And so be flexible, open, and listening.
That's great. And I'll just end with the conversation I had earlier this morning with a former colleague working on this at another Seattle company, and she was saying, the two things she's worried about are, what are my business partners doing, and what are the crazies going to worry about? How can we be prepared for that next? So worry about the crazies, get that dialogue with your business partners, know what data you have and what you're doing with it in the first place, have a sense of humor, and make sure you eat before you talk about it. All right. So thank you for joining. Really great panel. We know there's a lot of layers to this, but this is hopefully a great start for everybody to bring back to the office. So thank you guys.
Thank you.